including this one.
Well, I'm so glad that you're joining us today for worship. I'm Pastor Vicki. I'm glad that you're here with us. There was one other thing I wanted to point out in your program. We are having an all-church picnic that we want you to be a part of on July 7th. It says July 1st. It is July 7th. It's a Saturday. It's over at the Woodland Park, whatever you call that, the park at the Woodland Park, whatever. And over in McDonald. How about that? Is that better? And what we're doing is, this is the first time that the two churches are coming together to form this bridge team ministry, we're calling it. Pastor Shane will be appointed there or we'll both be appointed there, but he will be the campus pastor beginning July 1st. And so on the 7th, we thought it was a great way to kick off all of that by having us together, have a picnic together for that. So please come out for that. There's lots of great things to do, and you can see the rest of the details in your program. All right. And yes, we had a wonderful time. I want to thank everybody who was part of the food pantry. Amazing stories that we got to hear from people as they came through. And I have never seen a food pantry done so well in my life. Of all the churches that I've seen, all the churches I've been to that have had them, never seen a church do it as well as they do. And we had the opportunity. And I want to thank everybody who came to be a part of that and invite you to be a part of it. It's the first Friday of the month through the summer because the kids normally would help with the distribution, but because the school is out, they can't help with the distribution. And so they have called on us and asked us to help. We were able to send 10 to 12 people over on Friday to help with that, and it made a huge difference for them and the way that they were able to experience that. And as Sharon, who's the director of it, said, it's not just about food. It's not just about food. There are ways that they could more efficiently distribute food, but they choose not to do that in order to make it a better experience for their clients so that they will be guests who are a part. And so I really appreciate everybody who was a part of that and got to see that. Now, I know last week was a holiday week, so could you do me a favor? Raise your hand if you were here last week. I want to just get an idea. Okay. I want to just take a couple minutes to review what we talked about last week because it is so important going forward. And I don't just mean important for this series. I mean important for our church, important for how we define what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. We've been talking about the adventure that we're going on, and we've talked about, we've been using this image of Lewis and Clark on their expedition with the Corps of Discovery trying to find the Northwest Passage, and how for 300 years they assumed that all of the terrain on this side of the continent just came sort of to a peak, and then the terrain on the other side of the continent was exactly the opposite. It was just the gentle downhill slope all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And so Thomas Jefferson hired a couple of rivermen to get this Corps of Discovery together and said, go find the Northwest Passage. If we can find a waterway that will easily lead us to this Pacific Ocean, we will be so much stronger, our commerce will be so much better, we can have trade throughout the entire continent. And so he sent them out to go, Lewis and Clark, with this Corps of Discovery. And in the midst of it, they got to the head of the waters, they got to the Continental Divide, and they look, and it's nothing on the other side like what they were told, like what people assumed for over 300 years. They discover that they have the Rocky Mountains. Now, these aren't just any mountains. They're used to seeing the Appalachian Mountains, which are much lower and much more gentle. And they get to these Rocky Mountains that are so much higher and more ragged, and they are like, what in the world do we do now? And they could have turned around, and yet they said, no, we are here as explorers, and we're going to keep going. And so last week we talked about how we as a church are in the same place, that for hundreds of years, I mean hundreds and hundreds of years, we've had what we've called Christendom, where Christendom was the dominant culture in the Western world, where people assumed a certain level of knowledge about Christianity, where we had the ability, I'll say a bit of privilege, and by a bit I mean a whole lot of privilege, because people expected work and life and everything to revolve around our calendar. and around the way we do things, and people just sort of expected there to be this level of relationship with the church, and it doesn't exist anymore. Not only that, but we talked about the fact that sometimes we as Christians are the ones who are helping that disappear even faster because of the way we're treating people. And not to be unkind, well, okay, I just intend to be unkind. They basically shove the camera and the microphone in front of the dumbest person they can find and say, give us the Christian view of this. And I'm like, we can't have one Christian view of carpet, let alone one Christian view of anything else. And they get one person and they say, what's the Christian view of this? And of course, it's somebody who doesn't reflect the love of Christ, unfortunately, very well. And so this is how we're being portrayed. And now we have mountains in front of us that we need to climb if we expect to be able to be God's people in this time and in this place and in this world. And so last week, we talked about what does it mean now if people aren't just coming to church because we put a sign in the front door and opened it up. And I got to tell you, we've got a great experience here, especially for our size. We have a better experience than you can expect, than you should be able to expect for the size of our congregation. Every week we have dedicated people who work this, many, many, many dedicated people who work so that we can have a great worship experience when we come together. But opening the doors isn't enough. It used to be people knew where to go when they decided that they wanted to pay attention to their faith. But now it's not like that anymore, and we're facing Rocky Mountains. What do we do? What do we do? And so we talked last week, just reviewing a little bit. We say we go. We get outside of the doors of our church. What do we do when we get there? We love. We do whatever love requires of us. And why do we still have church? Because we come back here to fix whatever keeps us from doing those things. We go and we love. And we come back here to fix whatever keeps us from doing those things. Because my guess is your definition of neighbor isn't big enough. Because it's bigger than whatever you think it is. Maybe we have fear, maybe we have doubts, maybe we don't think we have anything to offer, but this is the place where we come because we're being sent as unofficial chaplains into whatever group you're a part of. The ball team, your job, you are the unofficial chaplain of that group. We talked about going and loving. It was interesting. I picked up a book this week and was reading, and this guy takes it to a new level. In the book, he said, well, this was his second book. He said, in my first book that I wrote, I put my personal cell phone number at the back of the book. And I said, you can call me and I will take your call. Now, the way that he loves people, the next person he locks eyes with, the way that he is the unofficial chaplain to the people in his life is that he never sends the phone to voicemail. Even if he's in the middle of a meeting, he will take your call. He never sends his phone to voicemail. So one day, he picks up his phone as it rings, and it says, you have a call from, and it says kind of a recorded voice. And he's like, this is a telemarketer, so he hangs up. 2 minutes later, calls back, and he's like, okay, maybe I better listen to this message. And it says, you have a call from Sacramento Prison. It's like, oh, if you accept the charges, it'll be $9.95. Okay, I accept the charges. Now he says, now I was expecting somebody read my book, got my number, and was calling me to thank me about how wonderful the book was and how much their life has been changed. Instead, when they connect us, I hear, Shania there? No, this isn't Shania's phone anymore, this phone number anymore. Well, can you get a hold of Shania? And he goes, well, tell me your name. I'll see if I can find another number for her. I'll conference you in. So he conferences them in, calls Shania, and a man answers and says, she's with me now, click. He goes, oh, buddy, I'm sorry. He hangs up the phone. 5 minutes later, you've got a call from Sacramento Prison. Will you accept the $9.95 charges? Yes, I will. hey, would you call my mom and do the same thing? He goes, sure, buddy. What's your mom's name, phone number? Conferences her in, and he calls his mom and says, hey, Mom, I haven't talked to you for so long. I just wanted you to know that I love you, and I think I'll be getting out soon. He said what ensued was a minute-long series of expletives directed towards this man, and then a click, and she hangs up. He said, oh, buddy, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. That's rough. He goes, what is it that you want? Why are you trying to reach these people in your life? He said, I need a bracelet. He's thinking, what does a convict need with a bracelet? He goes, no, it's an ankle tracking bracelet. The judge said I can get out on parole if I have one of those. So I'm trying to find somebody who will pay for that so that I can get out on parole. He goes, well, sure, I'll do that for you. How much is it? He says, and then I picked my jaw up off the floor as he told me how much that was that I had just committed. And he said, and I made arrangements to buy his tracking bracelet so he could get out on parole. Wow. Go, love. What does love require of me with the next person I lock eyes with? It's not somebody else's job, it's ours. We are the unofficial chaplains of every group we're a part of. Every group we're going to be a part of. Go love. Come back here to fix whatever it is that keeps you from doing that. So, this week we say, okay, if this is our job description, this is what we're doing. We're not going out and trying to get people to quit drinking, smoking, chewing, and going with girls who do. We're not getting out to everybody to believe in the same kind of baptism we do, that, once forward or 3 times back, or, dry cleaning the way we do as Methodists. What is it that we're going to do? Okay, we are going to go and we're going to love. We're going to love the person standing right in front of us with whatever it is that they need in that instance. Okay, then what? We're still facing the Rocky Mountains. We're still a group of people who are facing something that we've never experienced before in our history. What are we going to do? Well, you see, Lewis and Clark also helped give us a handle on this, because what they showed us and what people have learned is that when we face the rules changing, relationships become key. Relationships are key when the rules change. Relationships are key when the rules change. You see, we may not know exactly what it is that we need to do, but we do know who we need to be with while we do it. We do know that we need each other in the midst of all of it. For Lewis and Clark, what that became as they traveled together and as they shared their stories together, as they helped one another, they said that if somebody coughed in the middle of the night, they knew who it was. So much so that the next day they would make sure that they paid extra attention because they knew they were getting sick. Or if they saw the outline, somebody's silhouette on a tent, they knew who it was. They were so familiar with each other by the time they got in the midst of this expedition, by the time they hit the Rockies, they were one unit. As we say, Lewis and Clark, together. Now, what I didn't share last week as we talked about Lewis and Clark, almost like it's one word, the Army, they had requested that they give both of them a commission of captain so that they would both be the co-captains of this expedition. But the Army, in all of its wisdom, were like, no, we're not going to do that. So they made one a captain and one a lieutenant. But you know what? You never read about lieutenant anybody because everybody called them captain. When they said that may be what somebody decided, but we know to make this expedition work, we need both of us. They both had different gifts. One was the strategist who spent time thinking in his tent, in his books. The other one was out exploring and finding new passages and new ways, and all of them coming together knowing that they needed each other, even as different as they might be. They were Lewis and Clark. They were the core of discovery, that together we're going to make it through the Rocky Mountains, no matter what. When the future is uncertain and we don't know what to do, we have to invest in the quality of our relationships. When we get stressed and we don't know what's coming next, We don't just look for answers. We invest in the quality of our relationships, because what we know is we may not know exactly what to do, but we do know who God's called us to be with. Lewis and Clark had a saying. It says, the mission first, the men always. The mission first, the men always. We know that we are here for a mission, and that has to take precedent on the decisions that we make. But we also know that we can't accomplish this mission without each other. The mission first, the men always. If we're going to be the unofficial chaplains of the people in our lives, of the groups in our lives, if we're going to love inside and outside the walls of the church, we have to tend to our relationships. We have to not go alone. We have to not be by ourselves. We know that we have to get through this together. As your pastor, it's my job to help you understand what it means to be a chaplain, to what it means to be that unofficial chaplain in people's lives. Because you know what? We're not out there trying to convince people and teach people how to find the book of Leviticus. We're out there going and loving, and then coming back here to fix whatever keeps us from doing that. Because one day, when you take the soup to the person who's sick and you go visit the person in the hospital, when you're the person who shows up when nobody else will, one day they're going to start having spiritual questions. And then you're going to freak out. And you're going to go, what do I do now? What do I do now? You see, that's my job, is to help you know what to say next, to help you know what to do next. My job is to help you be the best chaplain you can be to the people in your life. What do I say? What do I do? Well, I can guarantee you it's not teach them how to find the book of Leviticus. And it's not to convince them to stop smoking. It's not to try to get them to be a better person. We have to help them answer spiritual questions in their lives. The cool part about this is a lot of fun. When we are out there, what we will find is that it becomes a lot of fun when we do it together. When we do it together. The second thing that we have to do when we've come up to the Rockies, we've never been here before, so we have to make sure we're asking the right questions. We have to make sure that we're asking the right questions. Let me give you an illustration. In World War II, they were asking a question: how can we get more of our planes back safely? How can we get more of our pilots and crews home safely? And so as they began to ask this question, you know what they began to look at? They began to look at the planes and the bullet patterns that were all over the wings and the bodies, the bottoms of the planes. And they said, now, we could put some more armor on this, but we can't put it all over the plane. It would never fly. So if we take the armor, we have to be selective about where we put it. Why don't we look at where the bullet holes are on these planes and put the armor there and reinforce it? And they had done this huge study, and finally a guy walked in and said, wait a minute. This isn't, your assumptions, we've got to question your assumptions. He said, why are you examining the planes that made it back? You need to examine the wreckage of the ones who didn't. That will tell you where to reinforce so that we can bring our guys home. Sometimes all we have are the right questions. Sometimes the landscape changes so quickly that all we can say are, what are the right questions? When Pastor Shane talked about taking all the questions going through your mind and putting them in the fire, before you pick any of them back up when you leave here, the question needs to be, is that the right question? Instead of, how can I shove one more thing into my schedule? It's not the right question. Not the right question. How can I do one more thing? How can I meet people's expectations? Not the right question. How can I rest in God's acceptance of me? That will change your schedule tremendously. And it'll change how you experience your schedule tremendously. We have to ask the right questions when we're facing the Rockies. How are we going to do this? Now, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a foreign missionary. I thought what that meant was that I was going to go to school, I was going to get trained, and then go off to someplace, maybe in Latin America or somewhere, and serve as a missionary there. And then Ken Kelly happened, and, that was all off. But I kept wondering, I thought, why in the world, God, would you call me to this? Would I go get this degree and end up pastoring a church in this country, in the United States? My training was very, very different than Ken's was. He went through the traditional pastoral route. And we graduate and we get into real life after the schooling's all done. And guess what we find? We are living in the largest mission field. We are living in the largest mission field. And when you are a missionary, you have to boil down the gospel to its most basic components. And you see, while people are out there trying to get people to go to church more and try to get people to give more and trying to get people to pray more and try to get people to get baptized the right way and believe all the right stuff, when you're a missionary, you boil it down to those most important pieces. You see, because you can walk into the country and say, well, you all ought to be married. And you know what they'll say? Yeah, well, when the priest gets here 3 years from now, we'll get right on that. What do we do in the meantime? Or you walk into Papua New Guinea and you say, you should only have one wife. I mean, after all, who would want more than one, right? But they have many. And they're like, yeah, don't say amen too loudly or you'll be spending the holidays by yourself. You walk into Papua New Guinea and they say, you should only have one wife. And they say, well, do you want me to get divorced? I'm pretty sure Jesus said something about that too. And you're like, oh gosh, maybe that's not what it's about. And you boil down the gospel to there is a good God who loves. And because God loves, God gave. And God gave us whatever and whoever would bridge that gap between us so that there are no more barriers between us. Now that, my friends, will preach in any culture, in any language. God loved, God gave. We are not separate from Him any longer. No matter who you're talking to, they can get that message. No matter what language it's in, they can hear that message. God loved, God gave. We are free to be in relationship with Him. We've never been here in history. We've got to boil down the gospel to the most important parts. We are not going to be the sex police. We are not going to be everybody's got to live up to our standards. We've got to say there is a God, a good God who loves you. I don't care the color of your skin. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care who you love. There is a good God who gave and took down every barrier between us so we can be together. We have to ask the right questions. What is the most elemental parts of the gospel? How can I be a better chaplain to the people around me? How can I extend my definition of neighbor? Because it's bigger than you thought it was. Where are people comfortable being? Can we go be church there? Where are people asking spiritual questions? Can we go be church there? How can we be church, not how can we do church? Now, I'm excited about this because I have learned a thing or two in my time. And the thing that I've learned is that when we get to this place where we have to depend on God, it's exactly when God comes through for us. When we get to the place that we have to say, we don't know. We can't take another step, God, until you come through for us. This is exactly when God does it. And I can give you story after story after story of when a church has been willing, when a person has been willing to get to that point, they see God show up. It's exactly what God does. My go-to story that I always tell on this one is when we were launching a new service and we completely lost our band. We had everything set up and they said, nope, we've changed our mind. We're not going to do that. And we were left 2 weeks from opening day with no band. And I called around to our leadership team and I just said, okay, guys, remember how I told you that sometimes something like this happens right before? Well, guess what? I need you to start to pray, and I need you to start talking to people and find out who can help us do this. And we raised up people from the congregation who never, ever would have been part of it because we asked and we needed them to do it. We ended up with a band that was 100 times better than the one that was coming to help. And all because we knew God came through for us. We are in that place again where we are waiting for God. And the way this week that I want to challenge you to talk with Him is to just simply say this: am I asking the right questions? Am I asking the right questions? When we change our questions, we change our life. How can I reflect the love of Christ better instead of how can I do more? What can I do? The gentleman I told you about who never lets his phone go to voicemail, he said, every 2 or 3 weeks there's a young man who calls me, and when I pick up his number, he said, I have it programmed into my phone, and I don't know his name. My phone just says, always pick up. That's the name I've put for him. Every 2 to 3 weeks he will call, and he will absolutely just continuously swear at me for a few minutes. He said, I've been called names I had to go look up to see what he was talking about. He said, and every time I end the conversation exactly the same way. I will always take your call. I will always take your call. Now, I don't know what that young man's angry about. I don't know who in his life has not come through for him. I don't know what is going on. But what I know is this, that he now has one person in his life who will show him what it means to be loved the way God would love us. I will always take your call. Even though I know I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes and listen to you swear at me, I will always take your call. We have a broken and hurting world around us who no longer are even going to think to come through the doors here, that we get to go and be the chaplains to. But it's got to look different than it has in the past. And it requires every one of us, because as wonderful a program as we have here, and we have a great program here, we need you, because you are the ones who will go to be a part of your groups. We'll train you. We'll be here with you. We will go with you to do it. But we need you to ask the right questions. So this week, make that your prayer. Simply that. Am I asking the right questions? What's the right question to ask? Now, next week, I'm really excited about next week because we're going to flesh this out just a little bit better. But let me just give you a word of hope. You see, there was one person on this expedition that was different than anyone else there. You see, there was no European or European American person who had ever gotten this far in their traveling. For every one of that Corps of Discovery, it was new territory. But there was one person, Sacagawea. She was just going home. She was just going home. She knew the land. She knew what it was like to traverse this area. She understood what was going on. Next week, we're going to talk about that. Who God's putting in our lives to be able to help us traverse this. I want you to stand with me. And as we do, I want to pray with you and I want to pray over you. That as a group together, we will invest in our relationships. That we will invest in the relationships of people in this room and in this church, those who are helping us along the way. And that we will ask the right questions. Let's pray. God, I want to thank you for each person here, for the chance that we have to be here, the chance that we have to adventure together. And sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it's both. And I know that our lives seem to be so chaotic that we're just not really sure how things are going to go. But you do call us to this place where we can hear your voice once again, where you say we're not asking the right questions. So we're committing ourselves to this week. Just simply say, God, what are the right questions? What are the right questions? And we will listen for you, and we will thank you when we hear. Now I ask, God, that you might send each of us from this place to be able to go and to love. And would you bring us back here next week so that we can hear again how you are leading us through the Rockies? Because it's not just about our church. It's not just about doing church. We want to be church. And we need your help to do that. And it is an honor and a privilege to be your church. So we ask that you will remind us and call us, equip us and send us in the name of Jesus.